For those of you who don't know Nikra, we're a nonprofit organization founded in 1978 to promote environmentally sound discards management. Our 300 plus members are individuals engaged in state and local zero waste initiatives with a focus on education, advocacy, networking, and inclusion. For our organization, the impetus for this webinar started about 1.5 years ago. We received a wake-up call. We were informed by a participant at one of our events that they didn't feel welcome or included as a person of color. This was a cause for a lot of reflection in our group. We never want anyone to have that experience at one of our events. We resolved to do better, and we formed a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee to seek and offer solutions, starting with this webinar. While the initial feedback and the self-evaluation was painful, it does make us a better organization. It's making us a better organization. And we are very excited about our future with a new awareness and focus. I'd like to congratulate Portia Senate, the Nikra DEI committee, and all of the organizers and speakers of this event. It's grown into something more far-reaching than we'd originally envisioned, and I can't wait to get it started. I hope this will be the first of many similar events. I also want to invite you all to attend Nikra's Virtual Recycling Update Conference. It'll be held on October 5th and 6th, and you'll be receiving more information on that. Nikra is proud to partner with the National Recycling Coalition to produce today's webinar. I'm going to turn it over now to Gary Liss of NRC. Thank you all again for joining us at the table today.
Thank you, David, and thank you for Northern California Recycling Association leadership in organizing this event, and particularly to Portia for putting it all together. Also want to acknowledge Arlie Owens, Brillo Robinson, and Angela Moore, who have been working through the National Recycling Coalition to start up a new technical council to address the issues that we're talking about today on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This is the first of 8 webinars that are being organized by the National Recycling Coalition as part of our effort to reboot our planned March 2020 National Zero Waste Conference that was going to be held in Berkeley. Unfortunately, it was 2 weeks too late and got caught in the web of COVID, and we're thankful that we're able to proceed now with great support like that of Nikra and those organizing this webinar to be able to offer a lot of the content that we had planned for that March conference in these webinars. The webinars will be going every 2 weeks starting today. Most of them are from 10 to 12 Pacific time. On the 24th and November 5th, they'll be 9 to 11 Pacific time. You can find out more information about the webinars at our website, zwconference.org, and they're on a whole wide range of topics: product policies, zero waste on campuses, reduce and reuse, rethink and redesign, zero waste community planning, national legislation and regulations, and hard to recycle materials. The National Zero Waste Conference has been fortunate to get a number of great sponsors to help organize the event, including Recology, Cal Zero Waste, the staff at UC Berkeley, Waxy, and Paint Care are our platinum sponsors. And our gold sponsors are the Recycling Partnership, Zero Waste Sonoma, the Mattress Recycling Council, Strategic Materials, Zanka Recycling, and Green Mountain Technologies. The National Zero Waste Conference is going to be now offered as a virtual event from December 1, 2, and 3. On the first will be focused on zero waste business, on the second on zero waste communities. On December 3rd will be the National Recycling Congress, which will have a series of national policy town halls suggesting ways to update policies of the National Recycling Coalition and others that we can work on together over the next couple of years to get advanced as national policies. This is the first time that NRC is offering the National Recycling Congress, and the first time in 12 years. And we're really proud to be able to do that as part of the National Zero Waste Conference. So with that as background, take it away for this fantastic start for this webinar series and the National Zero Waste Conference. Thank you, and appreciate your participation. And on to Arlie Owen.
Hey, hello everyone. This is Arlie Owens coming to you from the great city of Reynoldsburg, Ohio. It's right next door to Columbus, home of the Ohio State Buckeyes. What I want to do real quickly is let everyone know that there's going to be 3 questions that you need to pause and try to think about how you're going to respond to these, and we welcome your feedback. But before we get into the questions and we get into the heart of what we're here for today, and that is to talk to you, to let you understand some of the things that are happening in the world that's affecting our industries, recycling, waste management, zero waste, and everything and anything that deals with the environment that we all so dearly love. And we have some dynamic speakers with us today. And the first person coming out of the chute is someone I know that's been helping us with the Ohio Recycling Coalition for the past few years. Her name is Sophia Huda. And I wish all of you would take a look at her bio. I'm not going to read it. It's too intense. And it is something that you should understand that Sophia is dedicated to helping us and to move this program forward. So are you ready? Are you ready, Sophia? We're ready to put you on right now.
Yep, I'm ready. All right, let me just share my screen with you. Okay. All right, perfect. So thank you for that introduction, Arlie. My name is Sophia Huda, as you know. I'm a part of the leadership team of the Ohio Recycling Coalition, along with Arlie and Abrilla. I'm also a member of the Manhattan Solid Waste Advisory Board. I teach classes on sustainability at the New School, Parsons School of Design. And my presentation is just an introduction to DEI and sort of a situational report and discussion of the importance of DEI for the industry. So I'm going to start with a brief background on what DEI is, diversity and equity and inclusion, what it means for your organization internally, but this presentation will focus primarily on the external impact of DEI and what that means for the impact of your organization outside. So I like this slide because it gives a good sort of overview of what it is. And diversity is the first step. It's just about the numbers, it's just stats. Inclusion is just as important, if not more so important, because it puts diversity into action. It's the story behind those stats. It's about how people are participating in your organization, whether or not they're in leadership positions, whether their voices are heard, and once you've achieved that, equity is the last step in all of this, because with equity you're able to achieve impact, and that's impact in terms of the greater benefits of an equitable society, but also impact in terms of what your organization is trying to achieve. Some of you have probably come across variations of this diagram before, and basically it's about what equity means internally for your organization, what it means in general. Not everyone starts at the same spot, despite having equal abilities or capabilities. Here in this diagram, the fence, the ground, they're considered the systemic barriers to helping people achieve their potential. And so equity is just getting everyone on the same level by whatever means is required. And the goal of equity is to create conditions that allow everyone to reach their full potential, as I said. And so the rest of this presentation will look at why that's important externally. First, we're going to just look at general industry statistics. So this information is not super easy to get a hold of. We got some stats from the US Bureau of Labor Statistics on the waste management sector. But Portia was telling me that, she'd done a lot of research, she'd reached out to a lot of people and couldn't get more details than this. And even then, these stats don't really tell you the whole picture. What does this data reveal about inclusion and equity? We don't really know. Why are the numbers of women or minorities in the sector so low? Is it because there's a lack of applicants? Why are they not applying? Or is it a lack of them being hired? Why is that the case? For those that work in the sector, where do they work? Are they all concentrated at the lower part-time minimum wage end? Are they evenly distributed throughout organizations? So you have people in positions of influence and decision-making. So stats alone cannot tell you the whole picture of whether, you know, diversity is being operationalized and if it's making an impact. I wanted to talk about New York City because I'm not from New York City, I live there though. And some of the examples I'll be using build off my knowledge of the city. So in 2013, the Department of Sanitation in New York, DSNY, faced some lawsuits from Black and Latino employees citing discrimination and that they felt they were being passed over for promotion. At that time, 55% of the street level employees were minorities and only 5 to 8% were in top management. In 2016, the DSNY came out with a strategic plan for all levels of its operation, and perhaps it included a goal for diversity as a response to these lawsuits. But anyways, they included this goal to increase the diversity of their workforce by recruiting underrepresented groups to apply for civilian and uniform positions of all ranks. And the way they wanted to achieve this was because you have to write a civil service exam to enter the DSNY. They wanted to promote opportunities during the exam period and internally promote opportunities for promotion and applying for promotions. And so in terms of their progress in 2018, they appointed a chief supplier diversity officer to oversee policies and programs that would increase opportunities for minority and women-owned businesses. So this is being able to obtain contracts with DSNY. And in their 2019 progress report, they reported that 52% of the total workforce is minority and female employees, which is up from previous years. And while that's an impressive number, it also tracks with New York City's general diversity, which is 57% non-white. And of course, that 52% includes women, so it's women and minorities. We don't know the spread there. And more importantly, it doesn't tell the whole picture, that number. It doesn't tell the picture of equity and inclusion. There's no metric or measurement on inclusivity within the organization. We don't know what positions these people work in. And even if they're in high up positions, do they feel listened to? Does the culture of their organization allow them to express their opinions and create impact within their position? But one thing I will say is that the DSNY commissioner is a woman, Catherine Garcia, and it's a really great thing to see as another woman in the sector, to have someone in a position of influence like that in what is normally considered a very male-dominated sector. And especially considering that the DSNY only allowed women to join uniformed ranks, I believe, in the 80s. So it's a impressive progress. But you know, why are we talking about diversity? What are the benefits of diversity? It's just more than just a statistic in your annual report. So there's a 2015 report from McKinsey, Why Diversity Matters, that you can find a number of articles anywhere from The Economist, Harvard Business Review, talking about the impact of diversity. This report specifically found a correlation between racial and ethnic diversity in companies and better performance. Essentially, diversity has a high return on investment, so to speak. You get more creativity from the breadth of knowledge, backgrounds, experiences, and perspectives. Diverse teams are more likely to constantly re-examine facts and remain objective. They may encourage greater scrutiny of each member's actions. And by breaking up workplace homogeny, you can allow your employees to become more aware of their own potential biases, especially entrenched ways of thinking that can otherwise blind them to key information and even lead to errors in decision-making processes. You know, working in diverse teams, diverse and multicultural teams can be challenging, but ultimately yields better ideas and outcomes. It's always nice to get a fresh and different perspective. It you know, leads to better ideas and more efficiency. But diversity needs to be throughout the organization. So again, these internal biases and entrenched ways of thinking can be challenged from the bottom up and top down. Basically, you need to want diversity. You need to be able to leverage it, and that's what inclusion is. But why does it matter, especially for this sector? Organizations that make decisions and policies that impact a multicultural and diverse society should reflect that society internally. So I used to work in international development, and that is a sector where you have the most cliched examples and obvious examples of like foreigners who are going in with little understanding of the culture and context, and trying to make policies for a society whose culture and context are only familiar with from, say, an academic perspective. And so one example I got while I worked for Oxfam in Canada, I'm Canadian, by the way, is that you know, they had a project in South America, I believe it was Bolivia, and they had to develop messaging and a campaign for raising awareness about malaria. And so we had these Canadians, a bunch of Canadians who spoke Spanish, trying to come up with, you know, some messaging and a little jingle they put on the radio about, you know, mosquito nets and just awareness about the malaria season. And they found it wasn't working, it wasn't tracking. And when they finally asked around, they discovered that, you know, in the local dialect, either of the country or that specific region of Bolivia, it made no sense that the jingle they had made. And, you know, had they just simply had someone from the community working there, or even just asked them about it, they probably could have avoided this, you know, this waste of time and resources for a project that ultimately didn't have the impact they were seeking. And this can happen in our sector as well. And it can happen locally, even if you're from New York or San Francisco and you're making decisions, you don't always know about everyone in your community. And so that can be something as simple as just not thinking to translate signage, or not translating it properly, or using symbols, you know, that don't make sense to everyone, that are not universally understood, or something like setting up drop-off locations for organic waste or recycling or whatever in like locations that locals don't feel safe going to. So diversity matters because it helps organizations make better decisions. You're making policy decisions for the people you're trying to serve and target. And so that is why you need to, you know, have those people on your decision-making team. It's also greater efficiency, so that when you put your policies in practice, they actually work. And, you know, normally you could go out and do public surveys, etc., to get a better idea of who you're trying to impact. But people don't always want to speak, they might not be honest, and it costs time and money. But in addition to that, if you had someone from that community providing input within your organization, you could get insight you may not otherwise obtain. An example in New York City is that certain parts of the city inhabited mostly by lower income minority communities are impacted more by extreme heat. And they often live in buildings that exacerbate that problem. I definitely do. It's an issue with ventilation, etc. And especially now with the COVID and lockdowns, more people are at home. So this year, New York City expanded a program they have for giving away air conditioning units, either free or discounted, I can't recall. But the problem is that they weren't getting as much uptake as they were hoping. And one of this problem was that they weren't reaching the communities they wanted because they weren't using the communication platforms that they usually accessed. And so something as simple as that, knowing that certain communities favor WhatsApp as a communications platform, you know, WhatsApp group chats or public chats or something like that, could have made this program more efficient, could have reached more people. Or using community organizations that people might be more open to listening to and communicating through them instead, might be more efficient. And the reason that might be so is that some communities don't prioritize environmentalism in the same way, right? All people have a lot of different concerns, and you know, things like deportations or police brutality or homelessness, these are sometimes issues that they associate people that will associate with government, the same government that, you know, Department of Sanitation is attached to, even if it's a completely different policy area, a different jurisdiction, a different level of government. So the same government that they view as out there trying to deport them, or out there trying to, you know, with police brutality, is also asking them to sort their waste properly and store their organic waste in their freezer until collection. And so that's why, you know, people might not be as participative. How do you get around that? You know, another thing is not everyone has the same experience or relationship with the environment. So some people grow up without access to green space, or, you know, the parks in their local neighborhood are not as, you know, not safe, where it's not as easy for them to get out to nature. And that's also an environmental justice issue. So for some, environment, nature, conservation, it's a way of life. But for others, it's a privilege. It's considered a privilege. So how do you engage those communities to get them to participate in programs, to get them to separate their waste properly, to take off labels, throw greasy pizza boxes in the trash, etc., or not recycle them? You know, how do you get them to help you achieve your waste management goals as well? Because environmentalism requires buy-in from society in order to be effective. You know, you can't get citizens to pay attention to how to sort trash or remove labels from packaging or whatever is needed if they don't feel they're being paid attention to themselves. And I'm gonna get, you know, perhaps a little academic here, but the early environmentalism and conservation in the US was kind of formed from the likes of people like John Muir, who's the co-founder of the Sierra Club. And those early concepts of environmentalism, they sort of erased natives from the land. John Muir, when he was walking around in the great wilderness of the US, saw native people living off the land as they do living on the land, and said that they were, you know, dirty, they were a blemish to the wilderness, to the landscape. He was also rather derogatory, had derogatory remarks towards Blacks. Not a really great start for conservation. It's already eliminating a whole sector of society and these concepts of what wilderness and conservation should be. And this idea is also echoed actually in the 1964 Wilderness Act, where it says wilderness are areas where man is a visitor who does not remain. It's a very specific concept of environmentalism and man's relation to nature. And more concretely, that relates to things like, you know, the camping or other very white middle class, upper middle class pursuits. And even most recently, I think it was this year itself, Sierra Club recently apologized for their history. They apologized for, you know, the remarks of John Muir, and they openly acknowledged that they long only catered to upper middle class white people, and now they're trying to change that. But these concepts of conservation and environmentalism have seeped into our environmental organizations and the decisions and policies they create. So Dorcetta Taylor from the University of Michigan has done a number of studies about this. And in 2014, she released a study about the state of diversity in environmental organizations. She surveyed several organizations across the private, public, and non-governmental organization sectors. And what she found was that, of course, males dominate in these organizations, that racial diversity lags far behind gender diversity, and that despite the growth in the ethnic minority population in the US, the percentage of minorities on the boards or general staff of environmental organizations in all three sectors does not exceed 16%. And once hired in environmental organizations, ethnic minorities are concentrated in the lower ranks. They occupy less than 12% of the leadership positions in the three types of environmental institution studies of private, public, and non-governmental. And this very specific concept of conservation and environmentalism is perpetuated in media and culture as well. So some communities already know how to be zero waste, but they might not be represented as such. So for example, think of like composting. Composting your organic waste was long considered very environmentally friendly. So there was people long before cities provide organic collection that set up home compost yards in their suburban backyard or even their urban apartment buildings, separating your food scraps and putting them in the organic bin responsibly, or even, you know, what people in Manhattan have to do is take your scraps, store your scraps in your freezer, and then take them to local compost drop-off spots. So if you do these things, you're considered green, you're an environmentalist. I'm going to take the example, it's a very illustrative example, but here in Toronto, where I'm from, we've had a organics collection program for many years, and it's a curbside organics collection. And generally the participation skews towards educated and high income. So that means that a large swath of population, lower income and whatnot, are not being communicated to as well or as efficiently about the need to you know, compost or separate their organic waste. But, you know, what if you already reduced your food waste at the source? What if culturally you have, you know, family recipes or cultural traditions that know to always turn chicken bones into stock, or how to use every last piece and scrap of food? Or maybe you do this because you're trying to stretch the last dollar out of all your food. Because knowing to reduce food waste to reduce food waste, because that's money wasted. But you might not consider yourself someone who's an environmentalist or green, because you do not belong to that white upper middle class sector of society that the Sierra Club used to cater to, or that, you know, North Face is always advertising for, or something like that. And maybe as you move up economically, you might abandon these habits because you viewed them as money saving, and you didn't, you know, you never identified with environmentalism because it never identified with you. And that's a waste of resources and knowledge. And so how do you not waste that opportunity or those resources and knowledge? So maybe instead of messaging food waste reduction and composting, an organics program is something that's environmental, maybe like you do something like South Korea, where they charge you. That might be a strategy that could reach more people than appealing to a very specific white-centered concept of environmentalism and conservation that has been perpetuated since John Muir. You're able to reach more of the society, you have more of them participating in your programs, and you're achieving more of your goals this way. A discussion about DEI would not be complete without talking about environmental justice and intersectional environmentalism. So environmental justice is about sharing environmental benefits and burdens across society. And benefits mean things like parks and green space access for all, as well as, you know, clean air and clean water for everyone. And burdens means that, like, not all burdens, like landfills and sources of pollution, are located in lower income or minority communities, or more importantly, that they're not allowed to exist just because we know we can place them in those communities. Environmental justice and intersectional environmentalism relate to issues of social inequality and environmentalism. And social inequalities are growing today. And in light of that, how do we ensure sustainability how do we ensure sustainability and environmentalism is a priority for everyone? So I wanted to go back to the concept of buy-in, that, you know, environmentalism requires buy-in from society. Multiculturalism is increasing across the US, and not just in major cities. Arlie told us the other day about how there's been a huge increase in the Somalian population in Reynoldsburg that was once very small to now 35,000 people in recent years. And so we're not just seeing multiculturalism increase in the major cities like that were traditionally hubs for immigration, but all across the US. So how can we expect buy-in and participation in recycling and waste reduction initiatives from the residents of our increasingly diverse and multicultural cities and towns when they don't even feel represented? And so taking this back to the employees and increasing diversity in our organizations, it's not just a visual thing. So seeing a woman as the commissioner of sanitation, or seeing people who look like you in positions of influence, are important. It's really nice, but it's also about the decisions that they make, that they can make, and the impact those decisions will have. And so that's why DEI is important. It's about making impact and making efficient decisions and making impact through your waste reduction initiatives and policies. So that concludes my presentation. I hope it was informative for you, and thank you very much for the time and for the opportunity to present during this webinar as well.
Great job, Sophia. We're going to keep moving forward, and the next presenter is someone that I've learned a lot from since we've been planning this particular webinar, and it is Faye Christopher, and she's going to be talking today about developing DEI mandates. So is Chris, are you ready to roll?
I'm ready. I'm here. Thank you, Arlie.
All right.
I'm going to go ahead and
I'd like to say one thing before you begin.
Go ahead.
Working with 100 colleges, which one was the number one? Was it Ohio State? Ohio State,
it was
right?
definitely Ohio State. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That's the right answer, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. All right, I'm sharing my screen. I hope y'all can see that. I'm going to go ahead and into presentation mode. All right. Can you all see that? Arlie, are you seeing it?
I am seeing it.
Fantastic. So hi, everyone. My name is Faye. I am the co-executive director of the Post-Landfill Action Network. Today, I'm going to be talking about unpacking our mandate for diversity, equity, and inclusion. Before I jump into that, I want to introduce my beautiful team of staff. So we are a young nonprofit. We actually work with about 400 colleges and universities across the country on student leadership and zero waste solutions. So our team, as you can probably tell from this picture, is pretty young. We're a young organization, and the average age of our team is about 24 years old. So it's a young team. We're working with young people, and we work across the US and internationally as well. We do a lot of training, advising, and helping to set up different programming for students. And I want to start very quickly by talking a little bit about our theory of change, because it was a major inspiration in our diversity, equity, and inclusion mandate. So what you can see here is how we talk about our theory of change, which is no one can do everything, but everyone must do something. And so in the red, you see the linear consumption economy, right? We extract stuff from the ground, we produce it, we distribute it, we consume it, we dispose of it. And in that blue-green color, you see people intervening, communities intervening in that system at every place along the way. So when we're talking about zero waste, we're not just talking about one piece of this system. We're not just talking about the end. We're not just talking about the beginning. We're not just talking about the middle. We're talking about the whole thing. And because of that, intersectionality is very, very core to the work that we do. And that has inspired us to build our diversity, equity, and inclusion mandate. So today, what I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to tell you all what a DEI mandate is, extrapolating a little bit on what Sophia talked about. I'm going to talk about what our process looks like, what it looks like for us to write a DEI mandate. I'm going to walk through our actual DEI mandate a little bit. And then I'm going to finish off by saying why it isn't really about a DEI mandate at all. So to get us started, I am speaking from the perspective of an organization that was white founded and white led since the very beginning. In about 2015, 16, we started to realize that as an organization, we needed to do some serious work to identify how white supremacy and cis heteropatriarchy was showing up in our work and in our organization and in our movement. And from then, we worked with our staff and with our board and with advisors and students and many folks to start to understand this problem. And so I'm coming to the table from the perspective of a white person who has done some work, but I am absolutely not an expert in this DEI, and I'm not going to tell you all what to do. My hope is to share our experience, things that we've learned, ways in which we've messed up, and hope that it can inspire some folks to do that kind of work as well. So this is the beginning of our diversity, equity, and inclusion mandate. The reason we put this together was with this mission statement. We come together around this strategic plan to acknowledge systemic oppression, but we cannot fix these systems by ourselves, nor with this statement alone. We write this as a guiding principle to push our organization, the movement we are building, and the students and staff that we work with to fight harder. So this is just one piece. We don't present this as a solution. So first of all, what is a DEI mandate? So Sophia did a great job of defining diversity, equity, and inclusion, or DEI. And the way that we see that is a statement of principles held by your organization. But beyond that, it is how you put those principles into practice and concrete goals you set for yourself, for your organization, for your staff, for your board, for anyone involved, for your movement, on how you want to change. The way that I often see it is like a strategic plan for your organization. And an important part of that is it is a living and breathing document that can change over time. And what is a DEI mandate? Not. It is not a marketing statement. It's not an excuse to keep doing the same stuff. It's also not a quick fix. It's not a band-aid. It's not a one-time thing. An example that I like to use about a bad DEI mandate or a statement is Amazon posting Black Lives Matter. As the movement for Black Lives got a lot of attention, we saw all of these corporate statements changing their banner to Black Lives Matter. But they're still doing the same thing. They're still using the same practices. So that's one of the biggest things I want to caution in the creation of a DEI, is that it is not an excuse to keep doing the same thing. It's not a checkbox. It is a commitment to goals and change. So our process, like I said, it was similar to strategic planning. So expect a lot of writing and editing and research. If you've ever written a strategic plan, you know it takes a long time. So the first thing that we did in creating our DEI was self-education. This was as a white founded organization, and an organization that was primarily led by white folks at the time. We felt like we had to do a lot of this first work ourselves. There was a lot of resources out there about what Black, Indigenous people of color, or BIPOC, folks were saying about the work and about the structures that we were a part of. So whether this was reading or listening to podcasts or going to panels or learning from folks in our movement, we really wanted to learn about what people were concerned about in the structures we were a part of, specifically the zero waste movement and the nonprofit industrial complex. So we learned about those things, and then we started to ask ourselves, how are we complicit in those structures? How do we uphold those structures? And that was where we learned a lot about the appropriation and the erasure that existed in the zero waste movement. And I think Sophia said it really well, talking about community practices like composting that have been kind of sensationalized and have sometimes been whitewashed in a lot of ways. And so thinking about how we as an organization were complicit in that whitewashing, who did we have talking about composting? And who did we consider an expert in these spheres? Someone who was doing it because their family did it, or someone who learned it in college? And so that was a really important part of us understanding how we upheld these structures. Second, we wrote so much. We wrote and we rewrote and we edited. And this was something that we did internally as a staff. During that time, we started to figure out what some of the terms would mean to us, what realistic timelines and goals would look like for us. And we had to figure out some of our own definitions for What do we mean by diversity and how does that relate to our work? What do we mean by equity and how does that relate to our work? How do we practice inclusion but not tokenization? And do we want to address things like reparations and what does that look like? So there was a lot of defining of terms and working through exactly what we were talking about in this DEI mandate. And that brought us to the point where we worked to identify who it is we wanted to accommodate and include. So when we talk about inclusion, we wanted to talk about some specific areas of inclusion. So one of the things we wanted to talk about was people with historically marginalized identities. So that was the umbrella term that we've used to identify folks who have been experiencing systemic oppression through the course of history. So whether we're talking about people of color, indigenous people, queer people, non-binary and transgender people, femme people, single parents, working class people, we really got into the depth of who we wanted to make sure we were including. And then on top of that, based on our work specifically, we wanted to make sure that we were including folks who are directly impacted by waste infrastructure. So people living next to landfills and incinerators, and students and young people. That was an important one, thinking about the specific barriers and the intersections of identity that exist with these areas. And so that was a process that we went through of identifying who we wanted to accommodate and how we wanted to set goals to make sure that that accommodation was done. And one thing to note here is language in movements is often changing. The words that we use to identify each other changes throughout time. And we wanted to make sure that we were using language that is sensitive to the way that people identify themselves. So we have changed our language of the list of folks that we consider historically marginalized identities in our DEI mandate over time. And that rolls into our process of constantly changing this mandate, having it update. And I'll get into that again a little bit further down. So a little bit more on what we consider to be a historically marginalized experience. So this is an image that I think is really impactful. This is a visual representation of segregation, slavery, and the systemic oppression of Black folks in this country. And it shows the timeline of this country and how the history of this country has been mostly slavery for most of the history of Black folks in this country. So when we say historically marginalized, we're talking about folks who've been through generations of trauma and generations of systemic restriction of wealth generation and resources. So that's one of the things that we think about in our accommodations. And that's one of the reasons we talk about reparations in our DEI. So then the next thing we did after we had written for months, I think we wrote back and forth for maybe 6 months, we hired a group of BIPOC experts to edit and advise. So these were folks who specialized in diversity education and were willing to do work to edit our work and meet with us in small groups and help us grow our work. And then we opened it up to our entire network, gave folks the opportunity to jump in and give us some advice, let some students jump in. And throughout this process, we provided compensation to any individuals who committed to editing and reviewing, because we didn't want there to be any barriers to folks having the time to do something like this. And then finally, we published it. And at that point, I think we thought we were going to be done with it. But we've been editing it and updating it and thinking about it and referencing it ever since. And that's a really important part of this process because it can't just be a stagnant document. We're actually in the process of doing a full edit right now. So what are the different parts of our mandate? I'll go kind of quickly through this. So our mandate has an introduction. It has the feedback form right at the beginning. One of the parts about this being a growing and changing document is that we constantly elicit feedback from whoever reads it, and we incorporate that feedback. And then it has a statement of intent, which is basically a statement as to why we have this document. The bulk of the DEI is outlining our commitments to how we want to align each area of our operations to our values. So we identify how we align our leadership, our internal systems, and our external programming to our values. And in this section, which is the majority of the document, we have our concrete goals. We include how we want to do trainings, how we want to have annual reviews, how we want to have direct funding to BIPOC students or organizations, create scholarship programs. Similar, again, to a strategic plan, it includes some broad goals and some really specific goals of things we want to start working towards. Then we have our footnotes. Giving credit is super important. We try to make sure we give direct credit as often as possible. Our acknowledgements, again, giving more credit. The folks in the center of this slide that you can see here were the diversity and equity consultants that we hired to work with us. And then down at the bottom here, you can see thank you to resources that we use. These are some of the things that we read and we learned from in that first part of our mandate creation. And then we had our feedback form again. And then finally, at the very bottom of our DEI page, we include a list of PDFs that are every version of the published mandate. So transparency, every time we change it, every time we update language, something that we've recently incorporated that will be on our next version of the DEI mandate is a tracking of all of the changes we make every time we publish a new version to kind of show how we are learning and growing and what we're changing and how we've accomplished some goals, changed some goals, and how we're setting new goals. So why does none of this matter? Why does having a DEI mandate, writing, going through that whole process, why does it not matter at all? And the process is a process that we definitely have learned from, but at the end of the day, if this was something that we had let sit on our website, it would have just acted as a mask. It would have shielded us from actually doing the work that we needed to do. It couldn't just be something that we say, oh, just refer to the DEI mandate. That's how we make our statements. It had to be something that was changing and dictated work that we needed to do. So again, I think it's really important. Everyone does things differently, but it was really important to us in this process that this mandate was going to hold us as an organization accountable to changing. And that isn't necessarily the first step for every person, organization, company. There are other ways to jump into this and get started. So some of the other things that we've done in the process, or some of our staff have done beforehand, or we're still doing now, include making sure that you're listening to the folks in your organization and creating a structure where they can share their experience. Hiring BIPOC folks in leadership positions, like Sophia was talking about, making sure that folks who are the most directly impacted by the work have the authority to question systems and make changes to that work and to the structure of the organization. And for white folks specifically, starting to get comfortable being wrong and uncomfortable sometimes, and being questioned, and sometimes even giving up some of your power. So a couple of resources for that have helped me is the now famous White Fragility book, which is just one piece in this process, but can be a very helpful piece. This workbook that I've linked in this slide, I think we'll be sharing the slides, but this workbook that is the 13 characteristics of white supremacy culture that goes through the ways that white supremacy can show up in organizations and antidotes to that. And then a really fantastic video about accountability. So this is about transformative justice and how folks who have done harm, whether that's microaggressions, whether that is more serious harm, can be accountable, and how we can support each other in being accountable and growing and not practicing cancel culture, but we can grow and change. And then finally, hiring outside consultants can be huge because they can bring an outside perspective, critique, to grow and push your organization over time, not just to write a mandate, but to do trainings and growth. So that is it from me. Again, thank you all so much for being here and having me on this panel.
Great job, Faye. Hey, listen, all your topics, everything that you talked about today is certainly worth the exposure that you've given to all and everyone that actually is on the webinar today. And I would highly recommend that everyone take a real good look at Faye's presentation. And if she's available after the webinar or sometime during the week or next week, give her a call or text her if you have any questions about what she just proposed or what she presented. I think that would be great. I'm sure she'll do a fine job in answering your questions. Some of the topics that she covered, I'll tell you what, it strikes right at home because it certainly is happening right now as we speak. And now, speaking of speaking, we have another session coming up, and it is sustainable and safe recycling, which certainly takes center stage today in light of what we're going through today. So we're going to turn it over now to the co-chairs of the NCRA DEI Committee, Elena and Felicia. Are they with us today?
Yep, we're here.
Ah, there you are. Good to see you. Good to see you.
Yep.
Okay, ready to roll?
I think so. Yeah, Alina's going to pull up our presentation.
Okay, great. Take your time. You know, one of the things that I've been seeing here in Ohio, and I work a lot with Rumpke and Waste Management, and I'll tell you, those two corporations, they're very concerned about their workers and what they do from day to day. And today just happened to be Thursday, which is the date when Rumpke comes around. They do our curbside recycling and they pick up our waste. And I look at those guys, and sometimes there's some ladies on those packers, and I fear for their health and safety and welfare because of what they have to contend with, because some of the stuff that's set out on the curb, I would not touch it because this looks dangerous. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to you with your powerful presentation on sustainable and safe recycling.
Yeah,
Alina, do you want me to call up the slides that you sent, or are you able to share? You're muted, Alina.
Are you able to see the screen now?
No, not yet.
Okay, all right.
There you go.
Great.
Yeah,
perfect.
that's good.
Okay.
Perfect.
There we go.
All right. So we're excited to share with you some of the things that we've learned as we've been diving deeper into diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how we've experienced it and what we've seen in our different environments. Portia has been our leader here with the chair of the DEI committee, and I'm grateful for all of her work putting things together. So thank you, Portia. Just a quick introduction of myself. I'm a board member of the Northern California Recycling Association. I'm currently working with the San Francisco Conservation Corps on various programs and helping with zero waste projects, including recycling in facilities for bottles and cans, as well as e-waste. And I'll pass it on to Felicia for the introduction.
Yeah, thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Felicia Castañeda, and I am on the DEI committee for Nikra, joined just at the start of this year. And in my day job, I work for Recology as the artist in residence and environmental learning center supervisor. So I help support all of our educational programming at Recology for schools, as well as community groups, businesses, and even international delegations. And then also helping to support our artist in residence program, which if you don't know about, I encourage you to check out. It's a very unique, one-of-a-kind program where we support local artists by providing them a workspace and access to materials from the public dump, which they then create a body of work for a public exhibition. So yeah, we're excited to be on this panel today. Thanks everyone for joining. I guess we'll just get started, move into our slide. Great, so today we're talking about sustainable and safe recycling. And I just wanted to sort of zoom out a little bit and paint the picture about why this is so important. I'm sure a lot of you are well aware of the role that recycling workers, particularly those who are sorting materials, the role that they play in the recycling system. But just to give you, a broader sense, about 21,000 recycling workers, there are about 21,000 recycling workers who sort material that's collected at recycling facilities. So there is a large group of these folks, and recycling of course is a very important part of our zero waste efforts, as well as our efforts to curb climate change. It's estimated that if we reached a 75% recycling rate, that would be equivalent to shutting down about a third of all of the US coal-fired power plants. So it does play a really important role in achieving our zero waste goals. And these workers who are sorting and working with these materials, they're essential in really making the whole recycling process very efficient. And so we really need to pay attention to these workers. They also play a key role in the growth of the green economy. Recycling creates about 10 times more jobs than landfilling or incineration. And so by supporting and growing this workforce, we can actually help supply more green jobs and bring up more people into the middle class. So it's really quite important. And I mentioned that these workers play a key role in keeping the bales of recycling really clean, which of course is important in making sure that those items are actually getting recycled. We all know that when you don't have materials that are clean enough, often that ends up going to landfill. So it is really important. They are a key part of this whole recycling system. And so we really want to make sure that they are supported and kept safe in their jobs. Go ahead and hand it over to Alina.
And a lot of the issues that we've seen in the workplace firsthand, as well as read about or covered in 2015 Gaia report called Protecting Workers That Protect the Planet. And what our direct experience has been, having worked with some of these folks in the field, is that there are a lot of heavy duty equipment injuries. There are a lot of unsafe work conditions. It's a loud environment. There are hazardous items that workers encounter, and it's a low wage job with few benefits. And it's something that not everybody thinks of when they think about the glamour of the recycling industry. If you're thinking about how wonderful it is to have curbside pickup and how optimistic you are about what you put into your recycling, think about what it looks like on the other end. If you're putting in glass into your recycle container that's from a dinner party and the wine glass broke, who's going to be handling that piece of broken glass? And it's these workers that are on the front lines that don't necessarily have the advancement opportunities and don't necessarily have the education because facilities aren't always training workers. They want to move the materials as quickly as possible. And with COVID, things have slowed. So the lines have slowed, but at the same time, the material has not slowed. So it's really critical to keep in mind as we work with different organizations that it's a really important piece of the puzzle to empower the workforce and to come up with ideas that will generate change and bring up these folks to make sure that the opportunities are there. So not hiring temporary workers, that's often what happens. Contract workers are slotted in because of the time crunch and because of the amount of materials that need to be processed. So it's a lot of considerations that recycling facilities and the organizations that employ facilitators that sort recycling should be taking into account, especially right now as we're in the middle of this pandemic, and how important safety is. Working with the Conservation Corps right now, we are encouraging our teams to really be aware of what they're doing in the workplace, and if they see any issues to alert us, and that communication up the chain helps us address issues. If there are equipment problems or if there isn't enough PPE, we're able to address that by having our team feel comfortable talking about those issues. Moving on to some of the recommendations. I think part of it I've already covered, so diving back in, Felicia, if you can take us to the next piece.
Yeah, so one of the key recommendations, which Arlie kind of alluded to, is just the importance of education for the general community about what they can put in those bins, because these are all of the materials that the recycling workers are going to be handling. And so it's really important that the community knows what is and isn't safe for those workers. So there are a number of ways you can educate the community. One of the most important things is to make sure that you're educating the entire community, especially in bigger cities. It's really important to create materials that are accessible and that are multilingual so that you're reaching folks from various backgrounds. You also want to make sure that you are reaching people where they are. So you can't expect everyone to visit your website or to pick up your flyers. You want to go out into the community and make sure that people know what goes in what bin, what can't go in the bins. That means going to community events, that sort of thing. School programs are another really effective way to get out that information. Teaching habits to students when they're really young helps them build those habits and maintain those habits as they grow older. And there also have been a number of studies proving that students are quite likely to take the information that they learn at school home to their families. And so they're a really good way to reach families as well when you have school programs. Of course, another really important thing to implement or to keep in mind is to have safe and convenient drop-off locations for hazardous material, including electronics, household hazardous waste, batteries, and also prescription drugs and medical supplies. These are things that we never want to see in those curbside bins. We definitely don't want recycling workers handling any of that material because of the potential harm that it could impose on them. And so making sure that these drop-off locations are not only accessible, but also, again, that folks know about them. I think someone was mentioning earlier about, if folks don't feel safe going into a certain neighborhood, they will be less inclined to actually drop off that material. And also thinking about how people are getting to those drop-off sites. Are they next to public transportation? Are they way out in the outskirts of the city? That all plays into accessibility and how many people you're going to get participating in those drop-off programs. So ideally, we only have people putting the right materials, so safe materials, in your curbside bins, but it is something that you're going to have to continually address. Another important recommendation is to think about unions. Unions for these workers provide a lot of resources and a support structure for recycling workers. These workers have unique jobs that expose them to very unique challenges that are quite different than other industries. And so it's really important that they're able to connect with others in the industry and to come up with solutions that they feel really benefit them. Along these lines, employee ownership is another way to provide support systems to recycling workers. Speaking from experience, as Recology is an employee-owned company, these companies have a culture of valuing each employee and often have systems set up that allow feedback from even the most entry-level workers to make their way up to upper-level management. And so it really just, these models look holistically at the company, and they really depend on a healthy and happy workforce to deliver great service to their customers. So it really just sets up this culture that allows workers to feel empowered and safe in their daily jobs. And I think Alina can speak a little bit more about just the idea of empowering workers to speak up when needed.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen as a critical tool has been a standard operating procedure for safety, health, and environmental awareness of the place that they're in, not just the environment that we're trying to all collectively save. I think that part of the solution is having a manual, having some kind of operational procedures where it's clearly listed what is required as well as what would be in violation, so that is something that the employee can look back. If they're being asked to do something that's outside of that, they can then speak up, and they feel empowered to speak up. If nothing is in place and no one knows what can and can't happen. If you're in an unsafe environment and you're afraid of speaking to your supervisor, then that's an unsafe environment twofold. So having these manuals in place, keeping track of safety records for recycling companies and continuously evaluating them really has a big impact, because employees feel like they're being protected, and then empowering them to say something if they see something is wrong and something is out of place gives them that added opportunity to not only speak up for themselves, but speak up on behalf of their crew. And it's so important to make sure that workers who are in this very dangerous work on the front lines feel that they have a voice, and it is critical for anybody in the field to make sure that safety is a priority, especially if it is coming up as an incident. We're currently encouraging masks and gloves to protect ourselves and protect everyone that we're working with, but there are bigger concerns too as people are processing materials. So manuals, reevaluation of safety codes, and empowering workers to feel safe.
Yeah, and I just want to also add in and kind of tie it back into this idea of inclusion. We were talking earlier, I think it was Sophia that was mentioning that a lot of the more entry-level or lower wage positions are where there are a more diverse workforce. And so thinking about how that impacts this group of people, we want to make sure that we are providing safe work environments so that we can support all of the entire diverse workforce that works in the recycling industry. And so it's really important as part of inclusion initiatives to make sure that when everyone comes to work, that they are feeling, just as Alina pointed out, that they're feeling supported and heard as they are working in such an important role.
I think that sums up what we had for sustainable and safe recycling.
Yeah, so thank you.
Well, listen, I love your recommendations because I've lived all through each one of those. And I will say this, that one of the things that always stands out to me, you make these recommendations, however, leadership in one's organization has to make these happen, and they have to continue these recommendations and make sure that it is spread evenly throughout the organization, from the front office to the back office. So ladies, I really appreciate what you shared with us today, and I'm sure people will have further questions down the road. So thank you so much. And you guys both stay safe. Now we're going to move into our last speaker, and it's someone that I've known for many, many years. And you're talking about inclusion, diversity, equity. I met Abrilla Robinson many years ago at a conference in Milwaukee. I had no clue she was there. I had no clue what she was doing. However, a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine, Jim Rice, and I were walking down the hallway. We looked into this room, and there we were. And what I mean, there were people of color in this big room, big meeting room, and there was Abrilla at the top, at the very center stage, talking about what the National Recycling Coalition had charged her with doing, and that was to create the Minorities Recycling Council. And the topic that she's going to be talking about, moving forward together. And here is how I would sum this up. Alone, I can go fast, but together we can go further. And with Abrilla, working with her over the years, I certainly have gone further. So without further ado, here's Miss Abrilla Robinson. Abrilla? You have your mute on?
Hello, everyone.
There you
Hi.
go.
My name is Abrilla Robinson, and I hail from Michigan. Just to give you a little background about who I am, I was the first board member for the National Recycling Coalition back in 1990. And here we are, what, 20 years ago, 20 years now. And I actually came up through the environmental field, beginning actually with my mother, who basically taught recycling in our household in Harlan Park, Michigan. And I'm actually someone who came out of the automobile industry from Michigan. We were a GM family. However, things changed and the trickle-down economy came in, and I moved to North Carolina. And I was actually introduced to recycling through the self-help credit union, who said that there was a job available in recycling to help the community start a recycling program. So I am also the first recycling coordinator for the city of Durham and the town of Cary. That's how I became involved with recycling. And one of my main objectives was, because I was from Michigan, was to get to know the community that I lived in. And one of the things I want to address here today and really talk about is inclusion. I come from a family who lived in Michigan in 1950, and I lived in a very inclusionary community. Mr. and Mrs. Mike lived on the right side of us. They were Armenian. My neighbors on the next side of us were from Poland. Our neighbors on the other side were from Germany. I went to a parochial school, which was, you know, some of everybody. We had Irish, we had Chaldeans, we had Lebanese, we had a collage of different people. So I've always grown up in a inclusive society until I moved south. And then it became very different. So one of my main objectives was working for this organization so that I could get to know the city of Durham, because I really didn't have any particular inroads. I had a few friends there, but not many. So I started to work for a company called Sun Chairs. I don't know if too many of you remember Sun Chairs, but it was a not-for-profit organization out of Durham, North Carolina. We did recycling, and we also did energy audits. Dave Kirkpatrick was the executive director there, and Larry Kerr was our processing manager. And he basically built the first recycling system that we actually used to collect our materials. So, and it's through that organization that I got the opportunity to become a member of the National Recycling Coalition. And I was so excited to actually be a speaker for one of the conferences. I think it was in 1990 out in California. And I was invited to speak about the participation in our community because it was 80 and 90%. I mean, we were killing it. I organized my community through recycling coordinators and block leaders to actually push people out and get them recycling. Because the whole key was, you know, you don't understand that this particular material has value unless people tell you that it has value. So we started with glass bottles, aluminum cans, and got our community out. And out of 60,000 households, we had one of the highest participations in North Carolina and through the country. And I've been kind of on every part of what we're talking about today. I was the first recycling coordinator, but I was also moved up in management, and I became the HR for the company, as well as the insurance consultant to make sure that our employees, quote unquote, had insurance to make sure to take care of their health needs. I've also been the director of the organization, so I ran the front of the house and the back of the house and the processing too. So I've been every particular place in recycling, and I've also been on board, which was an exciting experience. And my take was what I did at Sunshares, which was to get out and meet the community, was the same thing I was going to do at the NRC. Because the first time I went to the NRC, I looked for people who looked like me, because I knew that they had a story and I had a story and we needed to meet one another. And from that is actually how I think that my awareness of the organization and of the people, and the fact that I am someone who loves talking to people, because I find we have more in common than we don't have alike, that's how I actually became nominated from the floor in 1990, and actually was the first African-American person elected from the floor of the NRC. And then the NRC gave me a great charge, because I was doing it anyway, to create the Minority Council. And that's exactly what I did with Arlie Owens, with Emoja out of Tennessee, with Charles Bradshaw, who worked for the military, with David, with Tish Powell, who's now in, is it Illinois or?
Elgin, Illinois.
Yes, So this is what we created the Minority Council, and we did some great programming, and we did some wonderful things, and we were hoping that it would just continue on without us. But it's 20 years later, and here we are again. And so what I'd like to say is that in inclusion, which is actually just talking to someone who doesn't look like you, you find out so many things of how you're more alike than you are separate. So the DEI Council, it's our charge to actually help businesses grow their minority, women, Blacks, African Americans throughout their companies, which the X, Y, and Z generation is already doing. So change needs to start at the top, and it needs to run from the top to the bottom and from the bottom up. There are magnificent young people out here now who are environmentally aware that all they need is an opportunity. And so we're here to offer our help through the NRC with DEI our council to kind of give you some guidelines, some projectives, and things to do. But my first charge is I'm going to ask all of you, speak to someone who doesn't look like you and ask them what their story is. And see if 9 times out of 10, you don't attract somebody who's probably like you, who's interested in the same things you are, and that you can build a bridge to. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Abrilla. That was very sage advice, and I hope everyone follows it because it's very important as to what Abrilla alluded to, is to find someone that doesn't look like you, and you would be totally amazed as to how much you guys are alike, and ladies are alike, because it happens every day, either at work or in your community, and you have to remember that. Our little small community here in Reynoldsburg, the school system has over 100 different nationalities. The children speak, I don't know, 50 different languages. So our teachers have to be able to understand the cultures of each one of those individual families and their particular neighborhoods. We're going to take some time to give some commentary about all of our speakers. Thank you so much, Abrilla. We'll be talking with you a little bit later. And one of the things that we need to reflect on is each of our speakers and what the topics that they spoke on. And we're going to be actually leading into some of the questions and a panel discussion. So we all should be put on your thinking caps and begin thinking about some of those 3 questions that we're going to be posing. And hopefully we'll have some really exciting discussions as far as what we've discussed so far today. So with that, I believe we're going to start with, I don't know if Portia's there, who's taking this lead on this for the 3 questions, or the, the intra-panel discussion.
Well, actually, we're a half hour behind. So
oh, okay.
This is Portia, for those of you that don't know. We're going to skip the panel discussion, which is disappointing, but we can handle it. And okay, we're just going to jump to the Q&A for the whole group. So Arlie and Ruth will be working together. I would like if Ruth would display the 3 questions, then people can think about them while they ask questions. Thank you very much, Abrilla.
Hey, so I've put the 3 questions in the chat. And as we have our discussion with the audience, we can reflect on those as well. And so what we'd like to do is we would like to do whatever you're comfortable with, either do the raise hand function on Zoom, which is at the bottom of the page for most folks, or just put your questions in the chat to me and I will read them out. And if you have a question for a particular panelist, just put that in the chat to me. So if you go to the chat function, you can just put your question into the chat. And while we are looking for folks to either raise hands or put their questions into the chat, something came up during Sophia's presentation. And folks wanted to, you kind of cut out for a minute when you were talking about the South Korean example. So I wonder if, Sophia, you could repeat your discussion on what the folks in South Korea were doing in your example.
Yeah, I was just saying that in South Korea, they, their strategy for reducing waste is by charging people the amount of food waste that they produce. I don't know if it's widespread or it's just in certain apartment buildings, but it is a strategy that they use in South Korea, or Seoul at least. And so my idea was that, discussing how, some people have different approaches to reducing waste, and that is not necessarily connected with these concepts of environmentalism and the way we message how to reduce waste. So maybe just thinking of a different strategy instead that appeals to other ways people will get to zero waste, rather than just these very white-centered concepts of environmentalism. But there's a lot of communities out there especially immigrant communities. My parents are immigrants. I'm a first-generation Canadian, and so there's a lot of communities out there who practice zero waste and waste reduction already, but don't necessarily connect it to this idea of environmentalism. So we're losing out on a lot of knowledge and practices and resources by just focusing on this very limited idea of conservation and green and environmentalism. And so that was the example from South Korea, is they charge for the amount of food waste you produce. So what if we did that here? That might speak to a lot of people who already reduce the amount of food waste they produce because they know that wasting food is wasting money.
Great. I don't see any raised hands or questions in the chat. Oh, here we go. Derek, you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
I don't know if I really have a question or more than a statement. I think, Sophia, I really appreciate your presentation. You did an excellent job, and you made some very good points. And you pointed out when you were talking about how reaching low-income families, and what I think about, especially with people of color, and how difficult it is to get them to recycle. I've been in this field for a long time. And what I find is that, when you are living in a low income or have that kind of status, it's really difficult to focus on anything when you're trying to think about how you're going to pay your bills, how you're going to eat, how you're going to, I think those people can't focus on what goes in what bin. I don't think that's their primary focus. And I think they're focused more on living day to day. And a lot of times I think reaching them right where they are is really important, because they're just focused on how to live, and people's perception, especially depending on where they come from, garbage is considered garbage, and they don't, and maybe not equate recycling and conservation to this. And I think you brought that out really well. And so I just wanted to make that correlation, that it's sometimes it's really just reaching people right where they are, and even then it's just difficult to get them to see the importance of recycling, when this concept, I think someone else mentioned it in their presentation as well, is about, it was geared towards, this middle class white American, families, or the middle class. And when you're low income, unfortunately, just trying to live, you're just trying to pay the bills, you're just trying to keep your head above water. And sometimes we can't focus on the environment the way that we can, and that's not the focus. So I just wanted to say that. Thank you for your presentation. It was really well. I really enjoyed it. I think all the panelists did a great job.
Hey, Ruth, can I make a short statement? This is Rick Anthony.
Yeah, go ahead.
Where I come from after 50 years in the business is the people who are doing the recycling. When you go today to a buyback center here in California, it's a very diverse community out there, because this is how we're surviving. That is a lot of low-income, jobless people who are part of this 10-15% unemployment, who are working in hospitality, entertainment. They are surviving by picking up bottles and cans and taking them to recycling centers and getting money for it. And so that's another part, is the constituency that we're dealing with. It's more than just a bunch of guilty white people putting their recyclables on the curb. There are people all over this country who are living off picking up recyclables. And I think it's something we have to deal with in terms of how we deal with this virus is to get the money out to the people who are needing it through the ones who are doing it. Anyhow, it's my comment. Thank you for listening to me.
Hey, we had a question for Sophia about how the households in South Korea are required to separate their food, and we will get more information about that. She has seen a documentary on it, and they do have these smart bins where the food is weighed. So when we send out the resources to the, including the recording and the presentations, we'll send out a link to some of that information about that program in South Korea. So are there any other folks that wanted to raise hands or put a question in the chat? Or just unmute is okay now?
Well, this is Portia, and I'd like to propose that that everybody who speaks introduce themselves.
Okay.
Thanks.
So not seeing any additional questions. Oh, here we go.
Let-
Was somebody, go ahead.
This is Arlie Owens, your friendly moderator. And
Mhm.
I want to circle back to what Derek was talking about with the communities, that their first and foremost is survival. And here's what we did with the Department of Natural Resources when I was with the Department of Natural Resources Division of Recycling and Litter Prevention. We came up with a program called Wake Up, Clean Up, Spruce Up, Pride in Public Housing. And one of the things that I realized, because I lived in public housing, I know all about being poor and unable to do what you have to do because you got to put meals on the table. But one of the things, the most overarching feeling that these folks in these communities had was they weren't part of the community. And consequently, they didn't get the message about recycling. They didn't get the message about keeping their properties up. So we came up with a program called Wake Up, Clean Up, Spruce Up, Pride in Public Housing. And I'll tell you, we worked with every public housing authority in Ohio, including all the major cities, Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, Toledo, Youngstown, and Akron, which one of the participants in that particular program was someone you see on TV all the time right now. His name is LeBron James. He lived in public housing, Spring Hill Estates. Here's what we did. In order to reach that audience, and you're talking about in Columbus alone, the largest landlord in Columbus was the Columbus Metropolitan Housing Authority, over 225 residents. You first have to build relationships, and then you tell them, ask them to participate in our program, which was Wake Up, Clean Up, Spruce Up, Pride in Public Housing. And then we went back and we talked to them about the importance of their contributions to recycling, waste management, litter prevention. And lo and behold, now the program is long since ended, but one of the things that came out of that was people began to get more pride in where they lived. They began to think about what their next step was going to be because they were talking with people from the Department of Natural Resources. And here's the cool thing about that. We hired young children, young men and women, I should say, to become part of, which is a program they should bring back, the Civilian Conservation Corps. One of those individuals named Zachary Reed ended up on city council for the city of Cleveland. Others went on, right now there's a gentleman named Mark Anthony Garrett. He's one of the top motivational speakers in the United States, lives right here in Reynoldsburg and know him well. So what you have to do and what we've done, I think what all of us are doing, and I got one more thing before I close with Gary, is that we have to practice what we preach. We've got to go out and reach, talk, and intermingle with individuals that don't look like us. And the last thing I want to say is with this zero waste movement, what's going on, I remember, Gary, Boston, when you, Bill Sheehan, Jim Hart, Tom O'Grady, and others refused to eat lunch because they served lunch in boxes. And at the time, you guys made the statement about, because I went to the meeting about zero waste. And consequently, all of you and others refused to accept the lunch boxes. Well, your lunches didn't go to waste. I'll tell you that right now, because I had an extra 2 lunches, and I think I gave a couple of my friends a couple of boxes of lunches. But at the time, no one understood the concept of zero waste. However, through perseverance and continually taking the message to the audiences that you guys have reached, look at you now. And I applaud you and thank you for your efforts.
Arlie, that's a great entree to a comment I wanted to share about the Fair Development Plan for Zero Waste in Baltimore. This is the first in the country that has as its premise coming up with a program and policies that are focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had a very inclusive process in developing of the Zero Waste Plan. We had diverse members of the community involved with that. And on equity, the city council, led by the council president proposal, adopted a requirement that any new policies or programs in the city of Baltimore must pass a equity assessment process. So they had to consider that. The Fair Development Plan is named that because at its heart, is diversity, equity, and inclusion. And an example of, in addition to what you were saying about your approaches in Ohio, which sound wonderful, in Baltimore, what we found on an equity issue was public housing didn't even have any recycling services.
Right.
Elsewhere in the community, they call it the black butterfly. In parts of town, the whites get the good services and the blacks don't. And in the black neighborhoods where they had recycling services, they were erratic. They weren't on a regular basis, and there was very little information about how to participate. So it really gets to the heart of these issues, and I strongly encourage people to look up the Fair Development Plan for Zero Waste in Baltimore. It was unanimously adopted by the council just this year in March, and is the basis on which the community is advocating for the closing of the incinerator in Baltimore, that they demonstrated $55 million in health costs associated with that incinerator, and they want, and the elected officials all agreed with the zero waste plan premise that they've got to stop that incinerator, close that down in order to achieve the zero waste goals there. So when we're looking at how to proceed on this, Baltimore is a great example, and I just want to take a moment to applaud the speakers here. This was fabulous, better than I could have ever hoped for, and is a challenge for all of us that are participating as attendees. What are we going to do after this session? How are we going to change our organizations to make a difference? That's the challenge ahead of us.
Michelle has a question, but we also have one from the chat. So let's go to the question from the chat, which is about, it's to Felicia and to Alina. For the presenters on safety, do they or anyone else on the call know if the injury and fatality rates among waste workers have been compared across states that have laws and programs to get dangerous items out of the waste stream? And so that would include things like, do they have programs on sharps or pharmaceuticals, et cetera? So Felicia, do you have can you address that question?
Yeah, certainly. So I don't have specific numbers on that. I'm not actually aware of a report that does that comparison, but what I do know is that even states that do have those laws in place, there's still quite a bit of work to do. We still see a lot of those materials coming up on the sorting lines and recycling facilities. One good example of that is with batteries. Batteries for quite some time have had laws regulating how they can be disposed of. And particularly an example in San Francisco, there's multiple ways that consumers can dispose safely of batteries, but we've still been seeing quite a few come across the sort lines, and in particular those lithium-ion batteries, which have been in the media quite a lot lately because they are particularly dangerous because they can start fires in recycling facilities. So we have seen an increase in that as more people are using those batteries, despite the laws and regulations and availability of those drop-off programs. So I think one thing that's really important, which I spoke to earlier during the presentation, is the importance of education for the community, and really making sure that consumers and residents are aware of these programs and how to access them. I think that is one of the really big challenges when you are implementing programs that can protect workers. And so one thing I think that could be successful is not only talking about the environmental benefits of these take-back programs or proper disposal programs, but also how it does impact workers and worker safety. And I think that might help motivate people to use those programs better or more frequently. I don't know if Alina or anyone else has anything to add to that, but that's what I would say.
Yeah, just to echo what Abrilla was saying about top-down and bottom-up communication, it is going to happen, unfortunately, with a gap in folks knowing what needs to go where, that facilitators and sorters are going to find this stuff on the sorting lines, but how they then take the responsibility to communicate it up to their management and what actions management takes to then communicate what the proper procedures are, I think is a critical step. So again, just echoing back to the ongoing top-down and bottom-up communication and procedures that can be put in place. But
Michelle,
it's for finding that insight. So
great. Michelle, did you want to go ahead and unmute and ask your question?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, this has been really great. Thank you for all this great information. I wanted to go back to what Derek had said. It's something I've been thinking about for a while, and I'm with the San Diego County Sierra Club. Well, San Diego and Imperial Counties, San Diego Sierra Club. Something I've been thinking about for a long time is how can we reach out? How can we serve people in the communities of color, in the poor communities, and meet with them where they're at, so it doesn't feel like we're coming in and saving them from something. It's just like I'm trying to figure out the best ways we can serve them and find out what their needs are, because you're right, a lot of people are struggling to just pay their bills, just feed their families, and I see that, and I'm trying to find ways that we as a Sierra Club, or just even me as an individual, can help in some way to, with whatever their needs are. I'm not sure how to bridge the gap.
Do folks have any thoughts for Michelle? Any of the panelists want to respond?
I do. Oh, hey, I do. I just wanted to say that I started a recycling program in public housing back in 1990 plus. And one of the things that I understood, I never lived in public housing, so I really didn't have an inroad, to be honest with you. I didn't know very much about it. I didn't come from it, but what I did have was Emoji Abdul-Ahad, who had worked in public housing, who actually sent a member of his staff to go with me to the first meetings that I put in public housing. And because of his experience in public housing and the fact that I was there to help educate this particular community about recycling, was my way in. It was my way into the community. And what he did at that meeting was actually connect with other people who lived in the community who were already participating in recycling in some form in their household. So it always helps to know people who know people. That's what I'm talking about when I say inclusion. It's what they always say is, now what you know is who you know. And so that helped me in terms of bringing on public housing, because my first public housing program, I actually did it from, they actually had recycling bins that they would put out and we would actually come collect. But we also did a public housing program where we had dumpsters. Now, our program that best fit what our residents wanted to do were the individual containers, but that's kind of labor intensive. But they did the program and they did it well. So that was just my experience. So, Sophia.
Oh, thanks, Abrilla. I was just going to say that it's also when faced with this idea that people have other priorities and that they can't necessarily prioritize sorting their waste appropriately or properly to create this sort of clean waste streams that we're looking for, which is actually a lot of work and can be quite complex. Maybe the focus shouldn't necessarily be 100% or majority on the personal responsibility, but also to equally address how things are designed, how the waste that is produced and the products that we have to recycle, and why it's so complex for people to do. If when it comes down to it, that all you have to do is know that plastics go in this bin and paper goes in that bin, and you can be assured that that small action that you've done is going to result in a closed loop, that's great. And so I guess if people who feel they don't have the time and I have other priorities and concerns, constantly feel that, why is it down to me all the time to make sure I take off the label and take off the bottle cap and everything? Why aren't you just giving me products that can be thrown in the bin, the different colored bins properly? So I think it's also that balancing out how much you focus on what individuals have to do in communities and how much you focus on holding product designers and the people who make the waste to account. And if people see that, they might also be more responsive to it as well. I think there's way too much of a focus on personal responsibility and saying you're a bad person because you don't recycle properly, rather than you're a bad person for making products that can't be recycled properly.
Great. Portia was going to address an issue around intersectional environmentalism.
Thank you, Ruth. I actually am going to address a number of things, but in particular, I want to start with intersectional environmentalism. So I'm going to share my screen now. And I know Sophia touched on this, but I want to take it a little further. Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
All right. So some of you know my daughter has an online vintage store, and she's actually covered in Vogue quite often. So when I stumbled on this Lee via Vogue a few months ago, I was very pleased, not just because it was in Vogue, but because of the topic. And so I want to encourage you to check her out. And we do have quite a few resources to share with y'all. They just weren't ready today. But in particular, I want you to check out Lee Thomas. And she's the person who sort of created this concept of intersectional environmentalism, but she actually borrowed it from some other people whose work she respects. But the whole idea that we're not just talking about environmentalism, we're talking about feminism. We're not just talking about DEI, we're talking about environmentalism, we're talking about feminism, we're talking about social justice. And I was very pleased to find this intersection because it really speaks to me, and I hope it speaks to you. So I recommend that you check it out, and I'm going to show you, this is the Vogue article, Why Every Environmentalist Should Be an Anti-Racist. And then she has her website, intersectionalenvironmentalist.com. She seems to be quite prolific. She is got many followers on Instagram, and though I'm not on Instagram, my daughter is, so I know how valuable it is. I recommend you check it out if you're an Instagram fan. And she has some great articles on Youth to the People, and then she has her website, Green Girl Lee. So I invite you to check her out and sort of have fun with it, because it may resonate with you as well as it resonates with me. So again, we do have a number of resource lists to share that won't be today, but it'll be in a few days, maybe when we send the link out to the recordings, haha. Also, Arlie's gonna do some closing, and I assume he's gonna tell you about some of the exciting things planned for the NRC DEI Council's future. So I'll let Arlie take it from there.
Okay, all right. Well, first of all, we need to all go back to our computers and look up the National Recycling Coalition, one very important thing's happening in December, which is the Zero Waste Conference. And one of the things that we're going to be charged with, and that Angela Moore, Brilla, myself, and others, we're going to be forming the new DEI Council, and we certainly would encourage all of you to participate, not only at the NRC level, but at your local level in terms of some of the things that have already been covered by other speakers. One of the things that I just also want to mention, and Portia talked about what her daughter was doing. We also here in the state of Ohio and other places, and I've been working with a lot of our solid waste districts getting the message out, and this also is going to tie into what we're going to be doing with the DEI, but with Earth Team Green, and I've been working with solid waste districts like the JB Green Team out in Steubenville, Jefferson, Belmont County with Anita Petrella. She's the Solid Waste District Executive Director, Louise Holliday, Alicia, and others that we go into the schools with a program called the Art and Science of Getting Green. Now, if you want to reach adults, one of the ways to reach adults is by reaching their children. And that's what we did with this program. It meets state standards, and it also, some of the courses, activities were adopted by the John F. Kennedy Center for Performing Arts. But if you look at all of the upcoming, I think Gary may have covered this earlier, all of the workshops and webinars, and we're going to be doing that throughout the year. As I said, there's also going to be, and we just was at a meeting yesterday talking about the nominations for the upcoming slate and the board. That's going to be very important. And we're talking about doing some things because of the COVID virus, that we're going to be asking people to submit a demo video of themselves talking about what they can do to basically do more for the National Recycling Coalition and all of its activities and programs. And if you want to add anything else, Portia, I don't have anything else to give. I also will be able to give people information about what we're doing here in Ohio, the Ohio Recycling Coalition, and as it relates to the DEI for the National Recycling Coalition. That's it for me.
Well, thanks. I must admit I was AWOL early on. So did you talk about the meet and greet and the future webinar series?
The webinar series, but we did not talk, and I'm glad you brought that up. I sent out an email to all the members of the Ohio Recycling Coalition, others, but Portia is going to be coordinating a meet and greet, which is going to be, of course, a Zoom meeting sometime in September or October. And at the particular time, you'll get to learn more about what we're doing in order to form the new and dynamic DEI Council for the National Recycling Coalition. And I'll tell you what, everything that was presented today is going to be a part of what we're going to be doing with the DEI Council. I think it's important that we are able to get the information out about what the National Recycling Coalition stands for, our standards, our guidelines, our values, and our mission, which is to be inclusive, be diverse, and be equitable.
Well, actually, that brings up a question that often comes up for people, especially since I'm a white senior citizen, and some people challenge me on my involvement in this topic. So, Arlie, when you refer to diversity, would you like to explain that a little bit?
Diversity, meaning people of color. And that also means, and I work with, and I'm talking about senior citizen, I have a direct link, and I'm a member of the Gray to Green organization out of Hartford, Connecticut. And all the members there, in order to join, you got to be 65 years or older. And these are retired professors, elected officials. But diversity means the coming together of people of all colors, nationalities, sexual preference. It doesn't make any difference. We open the doors to all.
Thank you very much. So before we close, are there any other questions?
Caden.
Is there anyone else you would like to say something?
I wanted to show you the future. Hold on.
Portia, there is a question in the chat asking if there's a listserv that we can join. So I think we will be following the work of the NRC DEI committee, and we'll send out that information to everyone as soon as it's available.
Well, that's a good question. And it's a very relevant question, but at the moment, if we had one, we don't have anybody to moderate it. So don't be surprised if down the line, we collectively ask for people, volunteers to help work on this. In my experience, some people don't want to be actively on the council, but are willing to take on tasks. So that would be a perfect task for somebody. So if that's something you're interested in, you're welcome to send a note to Arlie. Go ahead, Arlie.
Here's the future. His name is Caden Scott Owens, and my grandson. He wanted to say hi to everyone. Say hi, everyone. Say hi, everyone.
Hi.
Hi.
We should all wave.
Wave.
Yay.
Hi there.
Okay, he's being shy right now. Normally, he's real busybody. But
So
anyway,
thank you, everybody.
Okay.
And, I think that Arlie is probably your best bet for follow-ups on the DEI Council. And
Yep.
I will be definitely sending out the link of the recording as well as the resources. And I will also, if Arlie's willing, I will include his email address.
That's fine with me.
I'd just like to share my screen again with the upcoming webinars that are currently planned as part of the National Zero Waste Virtual Conference series. Again, it's every 2 weeks, 10 to 12 Pacific time, except for September 24th and November 5th, which will be 9 to 11, so that we don't bump into some great webinars being organized by Northeast Recycling Council. But these are going to be similarly great discussions and presentations on cutting edge issues. And do hope you can join us for the December main event, Zero Waste Conference. Go to zwconference.org, which has all the information about that. And that's being staffed by Northern California Recycling Association with support from Portia and others. So we really appreciate the partnership with Nikra, CRRA, and many other organizations that have helped to put together this first ever National Zero Waste Conference that has all the leading advocate groups for zero waste involved with that. I'd like everyone to also let us know what you thought about today's workshop webinar, and what we can do for future ones as well, and other topics that you'd like the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council to address, and topics you'd like NRC to address in future efforts of the coalition. With that, I'll pass it back to Arlie to close us out.
Okay, thank you, Gary. Listen, as Portia said and Gary alluded to, we're open. If anyone has any questions, comments, feedback, please let us know. Portia's going to send you my email. It'll be on, I'm sure it's somewhere. So just feel free to either email me or give me a call. We'll make sure that whatever you have in mind, questions, something that you need resolved, we'll get it to the right person. So everyone stay safe and over 6 feet apart.
and get your masks on.
That's right, mask up.
Right.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Be safe.
Be safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Well done.